My name is Charles Ross. I'm a principal of our Policy and Insights business at Economist Impact. Really nice to spend a bit of time with you. I'm going to introduce you in a moment, but firstly, I'm just going to ask you all to do something you've probably been doing all day, which is looking at the QR on the screen, QR code on the screen, which we're going to flash up in a moment. If you could continue scanning that and answering this question. It's interesting to see how this sort of changes, the ebbs and flows of people's responses over time. We're talking about sustainable finance here, so hopefully we're going to drive that finance number, or the word, a little bit bigger on the screen here. We've got investment, which is reasonably big anyway. So do take a moment to sort of complete that. Again, it would be interesting to see how this sort of grows and develops over the next couple of days. I was in Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago, and we had a sort of word cloud for a technology event there, and unsurprisingly, the two biggest words there were generative AI and Gen AI were the two biggest ones there. But we're obviously looking at things like collaboration and commitment and regulations. But we'll keep an eye on that. But good to see that finance is there and investment is there, because that is, of course, is what we're here talking about in this session here today. This spotlight interview is sustainable finance and its role in achieving net zero. This session is proudly supported by EY, so a big thank you to them for making this possible. And to have a spotlight interview, I need to have somebody to interview, and so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Surabh Dhingra, who is the Financial Services Strategy Lead from EY. Very good to have you with me here today.
Thanks, Charles, and very happy to be here and sharing my thoughts on sustainable finance and its importance in energy transition. And it's great to be part of this event and listening to some of the leaders and how we can together sort of drive the greater transition.
Excellent, fantastic. So good time to have this conversation. We see, obviously in the market, there's a lot of focus on the energy transition. There's a lot of public support for it. We've seen this sort of already in the last few days. There's a lot more focus at the board level and the C-suite around driving the energy transition forward. Is that playing out? I'm talking sort of, I guess, globally, from a global perspective. Are we seeing that sort of that focus and that growth here in Asia as well? Are we sort of seeing a peak period where we're seeing a lot of development?
Very good question, Charles. I would say, look, it's great to see the community building, and there's a lot of focus that's increasingly on transitioning, and especially on net zero. So a lot has been done by the governments as well as the private sector in Asia, but I would say there's a lot more to be done. I think we have just started this journey or started scratching the surface. I think a lot of work is required, and a very good collaboration required between the public and private sector. And if I could focus on few areas where I think a greater attention is required, is to start with the policies. I think the governments across the region, across the countries, need to play an important role in terms of coming with the very clear policies on driving the transition. And three things that I'll focus on or highlight around is, one is really the carbon pricing, and having a very clear view on where the carbon taxation should be. The second is around taking a very clear view from the policy perspective in terms of what do we want to do with the specific fuels such as coal, how do we want to go around natural gas, and so on and so forth. And thirdly is really the enabling policies, especially around the electrification of some of the sectors which are high emission, for example, construction, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of effort required from the governments. Secondly, I would say...
Sorry, just a question on that point from the governments. Of course, we're talking about lots of different governments here. We've got multinationals, there's probably a few multinationals here in the room, having to deal with these very different sort of policy regulation sort of environments across there. Are we getting better at that across the region? Sort of a bit more harmony across that, a bit more clarity?
Look, I think definitely there's a degree of maturity that we see across the region. And again, it's very easy to call it Asia, but actually we're talking about multiple countries and different degrees of maturity across the regulation as well. There are efforts to harmonize it, but it's still at a very early stage, I would say, right? Again, we look at markets such as Hong Kong, Singapore, which are definitely higher on the maturity curve, but there are markets such as Thailand, where we're sitting now, Indonesia, where there's some big gaps where we are today. So I think a lot more needs to be done to bring that harmony. I would say also the harmony required from the standardization of the green taxonomies as well as the policies. Some level of collaboration has increased in the region, but I think a lot more to be done.
Collaboration between who and who? Who do we need to sort of stand up for this?
Yeah, so the collaboration needs to happen at the government-to-government level as well as the private and public sector. I mean, if we look at the whole transitioning, we need a significant investment that need to go into this space. And it's not going to happen if there's no proper collaboration between the public policies and the private sector. We know the significant investment needs to come from the private sector if we have to really be able to drive this over the next 20, 25 years of 2050 net zero.
We've done a bit of research around this, and there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between the amount of money out there, so the strong investor base want to invest in good quality, sustainable finance products, activities. There's a fair bit of money there. Not enough things for them to invest in. Do you see a sort of a disconnect like that from the issuer side compared to the sort of the investor side? Is there a bit of a disconnect?
Yeah,
Too much money, not enough stuff to invest in?
No, I think it's a combination of I would say, lack of standardization today. I mean, even the investors are not very clear in terms of what's really green and what's brown and what's the clear definition of that, which has, I mean, I speak to the investors a lot, and there is a lack of sort of a clarity in terms of how do we define green, and everybody has their own definition.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think we need a little more standardization across that to be enable the investors to be able to find the right projects to put money on. So to answer your question, there is definitely demand in the market in terms of the right projects.
Yeah.
But we need to find the right sort of a platform and parity of investors and the projects.
We're seeing, some of the research we've done, there is this sort of still this attitude, this belief that you're going to get better returns from sustainable investments. About 60% of the investors that we surveyed said that they would get a better return from that. Does that stand up still? Are there some areas you're seeing that happen and some areas where you're seeing that's not the case?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mixed bag, although we are increasing, I mean, even the research that EY has done, we see there is a correlation in terms of the performance and the sustainability index of the projects. But there is definitely areas where we see there could be better improvement, as well as there are certain challenges, and therefore you have to pick the right projects that the investor want to go after. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess part of it might be the assumption that if you're running your business sustainably, then you're more focused on generating longer term value. Maybe you're a better manager, building better business value out of it. Might be something out of that.
Yeah, look, I think the correlation and the causability in terms of looking at the performance versus the sustainability. I think there are quite a few studies that have been done, and I mean, EY has been part of it, running a study in terms of really see the correlation. There are certain direct benefits in terms of the returns that you can see, and there are a lot of indirect benefits that you see from the perspective of the stakeholder, both in terms of your customers as well as the broader stakeholders, where you see the opportunities as well as the value that it creates from sustainability perspective.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point where we stop talking about sustainable finance and it's just finance? Because that's what it all should be, I guess. Eventually, we're sort of in this sort of transition period, I guess, where we need to.
Look, I think we are still far away from that stage, and I think we would all like to be, and everybody in this room, I'm sure, is a supporter. But I think where we are today, and for multiple reasons, I think there's a long journey to get to that. I think we need to set the real sort of baseline in terms of the right standards, right alignment of taxonomies, as well as in enabling the financial institutions to be able to do in a very systematic way. And we are right now sort of very early stage, especially in this part of the world. So
Okay.
At some point, definitely, and the hope prevails, but I think we are still far away from it.
I had a conversation like this with my colleagues about the sustainability function in an organization, and where we ultimately sort of probably want to get to a point where everybody is just thinking sustainability, and it doesn't have to be led by a chief sustainability officer type of thing. But there's probably lots of people here who would disagree with that, particularly if you're a chief sustainability officer. Thinking about the reporting side of this, I mean, we need to be able to measure all of these things, otherwise we're not going to get to genuine outcomes from it. What about, but it's complicated, and so when you're looking at sort of, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, it's complicated, it's difficult. The regulatory environments might be different, the burden on the company can be challenging. Are we seeing some fatigue around that, or is it, what do you think?
No, I'm glad you brought the word fatigue into this. Look, there are many reporting standards out there, and as you rightly pointed out, it's getting more and more complex, from GRI to SASB to TCFD, and the specific sort of requirements that country by country, which is definitely creating more complexity for the organizations. If sort of availability of data was an issue sort of a couple of years ago, I think now having a standardized view of the performance, both for the investors as well as the stakeholders, is becoming more of a challenge. And therefore, I think we need more standardization, and it goes back to my previous point of standardization of policies, but also standardization of the standards that's required across the markets. But it's like any other sort of a new area, it has to go through that maturity curve. And probably we will get there in the next few years. But at this stage, definitely it's getting much more complex.
Any markets you want to call out that are doing a good job here, a bit easier to sort of manage in, less fatigue in some markets? Is Thailand, a good market?
I'm sitting
You
in
can be
Thailand, so I
honest,
have to be a little biased. But yeah, I would say, look, there are definitely degrees of maturity. There are markets like Singapore, where we see much more standardization. SGX has already sort of made it mandatory for every listed company. I think Thailand is still coming up the curve, and therefore I think it'll take some few years to sort of standardize.
Okay. Thinking about maybe some specific examples, you work with lots of different companies across the region. Think about some specific examples of differentiated sustainable financing models that can be effectively utilized for the energy transition and achieving net zero. What sort of interesting models have you seen out there?
Yeah, look, I think obviously there are standard solutions such as sustainable linked loans and green loans, and the green bonds, which I think most of the markets has seen some degree of maturity. I think, but what we probably want to see more and more of is solutions such as blended finance, where we want to see more partnerships with the public and private sector, as well as the development banks, coming together, given the sort of the scale of projects that we want to sponsor, as well as the tenor and the returns of some of these projects. And the other important thing, I think, for the financial institutions to consider is to look across the whole value chain of their clients, especially those in the power generation, oil and gas, or the energy sector, and see how they can bring solutions across the whole value chain, rather than just looking at the upstream, which has been the case in the past. So I think I would say a couple of these things: blended finance, where we need to see better returns, as well as the long-term tenors and value chain solutions across the industry. Yeah.
You talked about lots of the money is going into the upstream of power generation. The lion's share of money of sustainable finance is going into that area or through energy efficiency. Do you think we're not getting enough money into other areas?
I think it's a combination, but I would say it's not yet enough, even in the power generation sector. But again, that's obviously one of the largest emitting sectors across the markets, and every institution recognizes that. But I think a lot more needs to be done, especially around the technologies. And as we know, some of the maturity of these technologies is still not there. There is a lot of reluctance in terms of the level of commitment financial institutions, as well as the private institutions wants to make to it. So yeah, I would not fully agree to that point.
Yeah.
But yes, there is definitely a support required across different sectors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking about that fatigue people, if we've got some people here in the room who are sort of fatigued going through this process, any advice for them to try and sort of overcome some of that fatigue if they're confronted within their own organizations?
Yeah, look, I think the important factor for every institution, or if large or a small institution, is important is to see how we can all come together as an ecosystem from the value chain perspective and see how this transition is not going to happen if one large institution or one or few large institutions come together. But I think it requires a participation from the whole ecosystem, right from the governments to the government agencies as well as the private sector. So I think that looking at the right collaborating partners, both from the perspective of finding the right projects, but also in terms of bringing the transparency around data and solutions would be very important. So I think everybody in the room, I think these are the type of forums where you will find the right partners and look at how we can all collaborate towards a common goal and solution here.
When you talk about ecosystems, are we talking about just from an individual market perspective? When you think about the ecosystem, we think about the Thai ecosystem, or we think about an ASEAN ecosystem, or about an Asian ecosystem? Where do we need to get to on that?
I think that sort of depends on each industry or each institution. It depends on what sort of environment you are operating in. But it's increasingly the environment we are in, definitely not a single country, but it's a regional ecosystem, I would say. And it goes back to my previous point around the fatigue that's been created because of the lack of standardization across different markets. And therefore, when we talk about the ecosystem, it sort of connects the whole region together to the extent the particular institution has presence in the relevant markets.
Think about the government role in all this. Clearly, they play a very big role. How do you think they can incentivize companies to be more active, be around their sustainable finance, and what should they be? Should we be incentivizing through tax benefits, or should we be sort of penalizing through fines? Is it a combination of the two? Where should we be?
Yeah, no, I think it's twofold. One is, I think, important role that government has to play. Again, going back to the point around from the policy and bringing that transparency in the policies and creating the policies, as I mentioned, a few areas such as carbon taxation, policies around specific fuel forms such as coal and so on and so forth, as well as the whole electrification of some of the sectors. The second thing, obviously, the governments can play is incentivizing the sustainable finance part of it. And as I mentioned, the significant investment has to come from the private sector, given the public debt levels across markets in Asia. And therefore, the government has a role to see how we can incentivize the public sector to come forward and be able to take some of those long-term bets that are required from financing the projects. It can come in form of certain tax benefits or even in terms of certain taxation on, let's say, carbon and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very balancing act that the government has to play here to make sure that they are able to push the agenda and also in some situations take the lead, working with either the development banks or the certain government agencies to drive financing of some of the large projects.
How confident are you that we have the right ecosystems in place and the right motivations to meet our net zero obligations in the future? Do you think are there some markets across this region where you're a little bit more concerned than some others, or you sort of generally think we're heading in the right direction?
Look, I'm generally an optimist, but obviously I think if you look back last, let's say, a decade or so, and the commitments that have been made, we're definitely lacking behind a lot across each of the market. And therefore, some of these forums and some of we are able to bring the whole ecosystem, give some level of positivity that we all are sort of trying for a common goal. And therefore, that alignment of policies, alignment of the corporate sector, as well as the financial institution is very important. But yes, as you rightly pointed out, the degree of maturity and alignment across different markets is different.
Excellent. We are pretty much out of time, and I might end us on that optimistic notes, and I'll sort of thank you for that one, because it's challenging. There is still a lot to be achieved, a lot that need to be done. If I saw the word cloud again, I wonder if sort of finance and investment had sort of increased as an important element of that, because it is sort of critical for it, along with the people component and the alignment and the collaboration of all those different ecosystem partners. So challenging times ahead, but I like your optimism. I hope we've got some optimism here in the room. We can come back in a year's time when hopefully Sustainability Week Asia is coming back, and we can check in and see how we're going in a year's time. Do you think we'll see progress in a year's time?
Hopefully, I'm fingers crossed. Yeah.
Excellent. Saurabh, appreciate it. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you as well to Ernst & Young for EY for making this discussion possible as well. We do have our next panel, which is coming up now, and the next session is State of Play, Shoring Up Energy Security Amid the Transition. And my colleague Ritu Bandari, who is a Manager of Policy and Insights at Economist Impact, who you may have seen on the big stage already, she will be moderating that. So please join me in thank you, Saurabh, for that great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everyone.